He received wisdom directly from God. Not once, twice, he wrote 3,000 proverbs and over 1,000 songs. Queens traveled from the ends of the earth just to hear him speak, and yet he ended his life building altars to gods who demanded the sacrifice of children. This is the story of the wisest man who ever lived. And the question that has haunted scholars for 3,000 years, what on earth broke him? The story starts with a dream. In the Book of 1 Kings, chapter 3, a young Solomon has just become king of Israel. He knows he is inexperienced. He knows the weight of what he has just inherited. And in the middle of the night, God appears to him with a single question. What do you want me to give you? Solomon could have asked for wealth. He could have asked for power or for the defeat of his enemies. Instead, he asked for wisdom. He asked for a discerning heart to lead God's people well. And God was so moved by that answer that he gave Solomon everything he had not asked for. Wisdom, yes, but also wealth, honor, and a fame that would spread to every corner of the ancient world. What followed seemed to confirm every promise. Solomon built the temple in Jerusalem, a structure so magnificent that ancient writers struggled to find words for it. He formed alliances with the great powers of his time and brought a rare season of peace to a region that had known only war. Then the Queen of Sheba arrived. She had traveled hundreds of miles just to test his wisdom in person. When she stood before him, she admitted that not even half of what she had heard was true. The reality was greater than the legend. This is where the story should end. A blessed king, a faithful servant, a life well lived. But it does not end there, because in that same book, just a few chapters later, we read something that stops the reader cold. The wisest man who ever lived built an altar to a god who demanded the sacrifice of children. How does that happen? How does the story of the century become the tragedy of the century? To understand what went wrong, we need to understand the world Solomon was navigating. This was the 10th century before our era. The ancient Near East was a tightly woven network of kingdoms, each one competing for trade routes, alliances, and survival. In that world, the most powerful diplomatic tool a king had was not an army. It was a wedding. Political marriages were the language of international relations. When Solomon married the daughter of Pharaoh, he was not just gaining a wife, he was securing a peace treaty with the most powerful nation in the region. When he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and among the Hittites, he was building a protective network of alliances around Israel's borders. Historians recognize this as standard practice for rulers of the Iron Age. What was unusual was the scale. 1 Kings chapter 11 records 700 royal wives and 300 concubines. That number likely reflects Solomon's total diplomatic reach rather than a simple household count. But even symbolically, it tells us something important. Solomon had tied Israel's political future to hundreds of foreign relationships, each one carrying its own cultural and religious obligations. Archaeologically, the debate around Solomon's empire is one of the most contested in all of biblical studies. Ancient gates discovered at the sites of Megiddo, Gezer, and Hazor were once celebrated as direct physical evidence of Solomon's building projects, since 1 Kings chapter 9 names exactly those three cities. Later, Israeli archaeologist Israel Finkelstein argued that those architectural layers belonged to a later period entirely. Other scholars strongly disagreed. Radiocarbon dating has been used by both sides. The debate remains genuinely unresolved. What the evidence does confirm is that a significant Israelite kingdom existed in this region during this period. The precise scale of Solomon's empire is still an open question, but the kingdom was real, and it was regionally powerful. Here is what confuses everyone. Solomon did not fall all at once. There was no single dramatic moment of betrayal. 1 Kings chapter 11 describes something quieter and far more unsettling. A slow drift. As Solomon grew old, his foreign wives turned his heart toward other gods. He built worship sites for Chemosh, the god of Moab. He built one for Moloch, the god of Ammon. He did this The text says, "For all his foreign wives who continued to burn incense and offer sacrifices to the gods of their homelands." Read that carefully. The man who built God's temple, the man who had stood in God's presence and spoken with him directly, he was now constructing places of worship for the very gods his own law had explicitly forbidden. Some scholars read this as clear theological failure. The law of Deuteronomy chapter 17 had warned future kings with unusual specificity. "Do not multiply wives, lest your heart be led astray." Solomon did not simply break that command. He multiplied the breach hundreds of times over, one diplomatic marriage at a time. Others take a more historical approach. They argue that what we are reading is not a sudden spiritual collapse, but the accumulated result of decades of small political compromises. Each concession to a foreign wife's religion was, in isolation, a rational calculation. But 100 small compromises stacked on top of each other across a lifetime can produce an outcome no single decision would have chosen. Then there is Ecclesiastes. Tradition attributes this book to Solomon. It opens with one of the most striking phrases in all of ancient literature: vanity of vanities. All is vanity. The Hebrew word behind that translation is hevel. It means breath, vapor, something that appears and then disappears without leaving a trace. The voice in Ecclesiastes describes a man who tested everything. He built great works. He gathered wealth beyond measure. He pursued pleasure in every form available to him. And at the end of it all, he looked at everything he had accomplished and called it vapor. Some scholars argue Ecclesiastes was not written by Solomon at all. The linguistic patterns of the Hebrew text suggest a much later date of composition. In this reading, a later writer used Solomon's voice as a literary experiment. If even the wisest and wealthiest man in history could not find lasting meaning through achievement, what does that say to the rest of us? That question cuts just as deeply either way. Modern psychology has a name for what Ecclesiastes describes. It is called the Hedonic Treadmill. Research shows that human beings adapt very quickly to positive changes in their lives. A new achievement, a new possession, a new status. The excitement fades faster than we expect. The baseline resets, and the pursuit begins again. Solomon did not just experience this. He ran the experiment at a royal scale and wrote down his findings 3,000 years before any psychologist gave it a name. But there is something else. A phenomenon that researchers have literally named after Solomon. It is called Solomon's paradox. Psychologists Igor Grossman and Ethan Kross showed that people consistently reason more wisely about other people's problems than about their own. We gain emotional distance when advising others that we lose completely when the problem is personal. Solomon could settle a dispute between two mothers with a single brilliant question. He could produce wisdom literature that still guides people today. And yet, he could not see his own slow drift toward compromise. This does not reduce the spiritual meaning of the story. It deepens it. It tells us that wisdom is not something you earn once and keep forever. It is a practice, and without honest, regular self-examination, even the most gifted mind can drift away from what it once held most sacred. The Bible does not tell us how Solomon's story ends spiritually. He dies. The kingdom divides. Whether he found his way back before the end, whether Ecclesiastes is a cry in the dark, or the testimony of a man restored, the text leaves that question open. And perhaps that silence is intentional, because the question Solomon's life raises is not really about him. It is about all of us. What do we do when the thing we worked hardest to build leaves us feeling empty? What do we reach for when achievement stops satisfying? 3,000 years ago, the wisest man who ever lived wrote that question down. He did not find the answer alone. If stories like this, one, stay with you, if you believe that looking closely at history and human nature can deepen your faith rather than threaten it, subscribe to Unsolved. Leave a like on this video. It costs you nothing and it helps more people find these stories. We will see you in the next one, because the questions are far from over.